Good morning, everyone. We are now on section Article 7 about children, raising children according to the Ananda way of life, based on the guidelines for members of the Ananda Sevaka order. We have been really touching on the heart of community life, marriage, now children. These are the subjects that move into the core of our being and are very important to reflect upon from the perspective of Ananda and the community life. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your guiding presence, that we may act with calm confidence and great joy, to be your obedient children, your happy children, your wise and compassionate children, that everything we do will draw us closer to our divine home in Thee. Om. Peace. Amen. So, Article 7, children. We just did Article 6, which was about marriage. I was talking in it got very interesting, the whole section about marriage, because it touches so deeply on human desire and our own self-will and our determination about our own life. But marriage can't hold a candle to the way we feel about our children. So Swami writes in the marriage section and now in the children section, he writes in a very general way, but having lived through many years at community, the kind of awareness that Swamiji is trying to awaken in us is not simple. It's not simple in the sense that we are instinctively and culturally trained in the matter of the personal family in a very strong and specific way. And we have to keep going back to that we should not continue on, always have to find it again, but should mentally sift through their personal habits and not continue unthinkingly in old patterns merely because of prior momentum. And the other, from Article 2, life in a community cannot include both an involvement in the community and too strong an affirmation of personal independence. And then I had to do a caveat on all of this last week, because I had to talk about why would we even join a community in the first place? And why would we put ourselves in the position where other people can have actual opinions that we have at least quasi-agreed to listen to on matters that we are habitually thinking are just our concern. And quite honestly, I don't have real good answers to those questions. I can answer them theoretically. I can spin a very good philosophy on it. But it's something we're all trying to learn. When Master announced as one of his fundamental objectives in this incarnation and coming to America was to start these intentional spiritual communities where not only monks and nuns, but married people and single people and families with children could live lives wholly dedicated to God. And, we just sort of say, oh, yeah, that's great. Let's just all get together. And I've been doing this for decades and I love it. I mean, it's totally fun. But it's a revolution. It's not really just business as usual in a more congenial environment. It's really having the imagination and the clarity to reorient ourselves in very deep ways. When I was, I don't want to use the word disclaimer, but when I was having to do my day of explanation about why marriage isn't just a private affair, and that, the advice of the community has to also be heeded. Let me think what I was going to say there. Oh, yes. What I was realizing is that in any traditional monastic order, that degree of involvement with our personal life would be considered but of course. But when we start pushing into the area of marriage and family life, it becomes dicey, and it becomes dicey for good reason, because we are repudiating that past idea of monastic life where the monk or the nun was owned by the order in a way that much of the time proved extremely unhealthy, both for the community and for the individual. So we're certainly not wanting to walk into this thing and just recreate the monster with a different name on it. So it's just a very interesting experiment. So now we're up to children, and I have to say, in this lifetime, I've never had children. I've never raised children. I have, of course, many friends who have, and I have numerous godchildren, but I have, and one blood relative who came as a baby and is now a grown man. But I've never been even a surrogate parent. I mean, in the sense of, even though I know lots of children, I've only ever been extremely peripherally involved in the raising of children. So I will speak from my observation and my past life memories, but not from this life experience. So Swami starts, children are not possessions. They are sacred charges. That's a very interesting beginning. My children, my son, my daughter. Or are we stewards of this soul's destiny? A parent's responsibility to their children is a responsibility in God and must be discharged in truth, love, and divine respect. They must seek ever to touch the children at their highest level of reality. Well, I don't know a single parent who wouldn't subscribe to that truth. I mean, that's how we start. Of course, then human longing and human desire get involved. I remember I was sitting once meditating at Ananda village when I lived there, still, but when I lived there, the building which is now Hansa Temple was our publications building, and on the front of the building there was a balcony. It didn't have any railings, it was just this high balcony, and in the summer we all used to go out there at noon for our meditation. We'd sit and dangle our legs over the edge of the platform and meditate, and it gave us a view of what we still called downtown Ananda, which is really just the market and a few meeting places, the mail room. It's the closest thing we have to a downtown. And you could get a full view of it, and I don't know how long the distance was. There was a place where the cars were and the place where the market was. Maybe it was as long as a football field, which would be about 100 yards. I remember I was sitting on the platform. Meditation was finished, and I saw down, and I saw a friend of mine pull up in his car and get out of his car, and his little daughter, who was probably 5 at that time, just the most beautiful, adorable little child. She saw her father over here. She began to scream in a voice that was loud enough for me to hear way up the hill. She was just calling, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," like this. She proceeded to run the whole length of the football field. And with full force, she just jumped and threw herself into his arms. And of course, he caught her in a big bear hug, and it was a beautiful scene. And I thought to myself, how could you not get attached? I mean, how could you just lose track of everything except the absolute sheer pleasure of being loved and having the opportunity to love such a beautiful little person as has been sent to you by God to care for. So of course, what happens to all of this, and it has to happen, is that children are so adorable. You know, they're just the cutest things you've ever seen. There's a new baby in our community. He's about 4 months old now, baby like that. He's one of these babies with these enormous cheeks, you know, like he fills it full of oatmeal every morning and just keeps it like that. And inexplicably, in the last few weeks, now he really looks like a little boy. And he's still just a baby, so there's nothing about him, but somehow his character is coming out, and he has a very sort of impish, masculine little boy nature. And I'm standing there I'm a sucker for babies, you know. I'm gooing with him and talking to him about his teething ring and the importance of teeth and how good he's doing, you know. Go teeth, you know, these are like really big things that children have to do, and he's absolutely dedicated to chewing on this thing to get these teeth going. And, you know, next to me, his mother is just about to burst with pride and enthusiasm, pride in the sense of just because he's such a gorgeous little baby and she's so happy. I don't mean egoic, just excitement. It's her first baby, and you know, it's just, there's the whole scene, and it's a perfectly appropriate scene. You don't maintain your detachment by withholding your love or your commitment. But having children is a full-time sadhana. It's a major, huge, gigantic sadhana. It's the sadhana of incredible self-sacrifice. I mean, basically, you become unimportant. It's perfectly demonstrated by the fact that, you know, I give lip service to the mother of this child. Oh, hi, how are you? Boom, there I am with the baby. And then so often, just out of like some vague remembrance that there was someone else around, I would glance over and say something, but the only thing I would say was I would say something to her about the baby. You know, nothing to her about her. I mean, that's how people respond. And parents laugh about it, but it's the truth. They cease to exist. The reason God compels most people to have children, either just by a biological accident or by intense desire, is because it teaches us to be selfless. It teaches us how to love. We're helpless in our, most parents are just helpless in the way they love their children. Meaning there's no possible way you can regulate it. It just pours out of you. And then to realize that it has to pour through those children to God and not just into those children as your children. Because here's the sad truth about it all. They don't stay children. One older woman I knew, she had 3 children. I was acquainted with her grown children. She didn't have that. She wasn't one who had many family pictures, but she had 3 portraits of her children, and the portraits were when the children were about 8 or 9 years old, and to quote my own mother, when they still belonged to her, because they don't. And in fact, if you think about it, if you think how many lifetimes every soul has had, what proportion of life the first, let's even call it 20 years is, in which you are dependent in your parents, and then how many years you have after that. Now, especially in America, in Italy and in India, where we also have strong Ananda presence, and I know people listen globally, the parent-child relationship usually in those countries maintains itself with more force much longer. But since this was written in America, children, generally speaking, leave their parents before the age of 20. Nowadays they stick a little closer, but the importance of the parents in the child's life goes way, way down when the children reach their 20s. One of the most, still I can hardly think of it, is when I was about 19 and my father realized that I was leaving. I mean, I was just leaving. My family was very good. My father and I were close, but I never even imagined for a moment I'd make my life with my father. And he knew I wasn't going to. But nonetheless, I remember the look in his eyes when he realized it was going to happen. My father moved as far away from his parents as he could, literally. He lived in Los Angeles and his parents lived in New York City. My mother was from Florida and they moved to Los Angeles, and they did this on purpose in both cases. They both needed to get away from their parents, so why would it be a surprise that their children would do the same? But daddy, 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 daddy. So this is something that it takes every day, just every day. We have to constantly remember, I'm here to serve these children. They are a sacred responsibility given to me by God. I will do my very best. Now, you see, this is also something, as Swami put it, you don't get out of karma by doing it badly. And this is a mistake people have in their minds. Oh, I don't want to get attached. And so therefore I will withhold. That's not detachment, that's irresponsibility and fear. It's the fear of, oh, I'm going to do it wrong, so I'm not going to do it at all. And the other part about it is you'll get your heart broken. I mean, you just will. My friend said when his son went to college, his phrase was, it was like getting divorced without ever falling out of love. You know, he was as much in love with his son when he left for college as he was when the day he was born. But now they were getting divorced, meaning that he'd raised the boy to have his own life. Now, of course, my friend recovered, but you still look back to the time, as my mother called it, when you all belonged to me. So it's a razor's edge. And this is uncharted ground. You know, in traditional societies where the parents and the children stay together more, the parents rule the children's life more, even into adulthood. Now, of course, I am coming from individualistic American prejudice, but I'm not sure it's a better system. People sort of cling to each other and hang out longer, but I'm not sure that everybody reaches their full potential. You raise the children and live through them. The children are never allowed really to find their own feet because the parents are still guiding them. I don't really know. I'm not going to make a definitive statement, because one of the wonderful things about our community is that we do have multiple generations. Not by any means all of them. Most of the young people grow up and go out and live another life. Only a very small percentage stay with us. But it's lovely when they do. But even then, they often move to a different community. And they often tell me that they need to move to a different community because otherwise their concept of Ananda is only their parents' concept of Ananda. And in helping children make this transition, sometimes I've had to find a delicate way to say that. You know, what you think is Ananda is the part of Ananda that your parents perceived. It's not necessarily the part of it that you are going to perceive as belonging to you. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Everybody has a role. Some people are school teachers, some, like myself, work with the public, others are completely behind the scenes doing the gardens, you know, some build, some write books. And for each of us, it's Ananda. This is our Ananda. But your offspring are not necessarily going to do it. I also remember, just because I'm on this same theme, recently I was talking to a woman who has a grown child, and it was a moment when the mother needed to think about this differently. I pointed out that she and her own mother, although they had a very sweet, loving relationship, that my friend did not make the life her mother wanted her to make. And she did not have a life that kept her in close association with her mother. And I said, why do you think your daughter is going to cling to you for her whole adult life? Of course, my friend, who was very honest, just sort of paused and said, I just thought we would be different. And of course I understand that. But to her credit, she took that question really deeply inside. And you have to come back and you say, children are not possessions, they are sacred charges. My whole reason for bringing this child into this world, or by God sending this child to me, I was quite surprised as I grew up and realized how many children were surprised to their parents. But that's a whole nother side of it. But it's God intended, however it comes about. This is a sacred responsibility, and I need to do my part for the sake of this person whom I love more than anything else in the world. And it's going to form its own destiny. The parents have a duty also to the order and to the community in raising their children, if only because their children's behavior can affect other children in the community. Over the years, this has been a point of enormous contention, because parents have very different ideas of what's acceptable. It has to do with, well, ages ago, it had to do with the simple question of whether we would have television in the community. Because we lived for many years without electricity, and as a consequence, the question of television, we simply didn't have television. And children, I mean, now it's laughably quaint to even talk like that. But in those early years, children who did not watch television were distinctly different from children who did. And our school teachers could even tell if a child had watched television the night before, because their attention span was different, their expectations, their moods, and of course these screens are hypnotic. And I know that, again, this is all quaint considering the world that we're in now, but it was actually a very serious issue, because as soon as one family allowed television in, the children went in and out of each other's houses. And so one parent could not want the influence of television, the mechanical influence of the screen, what to speak of the content, and then a community consensus on what content was acceptable, because it was a very small entity, one gang of children, one family insisting on taking a different stance from what the community wanted. It was almost impossible to maintain. Swami spoke very strongly against allowing children to watch television, but his advice was not heeded. And now, of course, with access to personal screens all the time, it's just an entirely different issue. But it doesn't, issue in the sense of virtually uncontrollable. When I was speaking about the influences of marriage, of romantic movies and television and all of that, when we start getting into what children are allowed to see and how much the world has changed, and just what I was trying to say. There was a book, and it came out many years ago. It was called Raising Ophelia, and it was written by a woman psychologist, and she just talked about her realization that of what her 10, 11, and 12-year-old daughter was familiar with because of the mass media. And she said, and it was invaded, it broke down the walls of every home. Now, again, I'm not a parent raising children, so I don't have firsthand experience about this. But what the children have access to and know about. In our school here in Palo Alto, we try, at least on the influence that the school does, we try to keep a greater innocence around the children. we don't have a complete buy-in from our school parents. And we held it, we've been doing a school for 30 years. We had a little more capacity to influence it 3 decades ago. But now it's very, very difficult. So that is a huge issue that just takes away the power of the parents. But nonetheless, in a community, if parents are all on the same page and if we're all committed, and for most of you listening, this is not relevant because you live in other situations. And as I'm saying, even our isolated communities are not isolated anymore. But even the principle that, how I raise my children is going to impact the way other people are trying to raise their children. And this is the challenge of community. Community is that we do have to work together, even on a matter that feels so personal to me. And even if we can't come to an agreement, we at least have to work with respect and love for each other. I'm sure this happens among cousins in more traditional, larger families. Parents haven't the right, Swami says, to insist, as parents often do in the world, this child is ours to raise as we feel to do. The community's feelings in such matters should be considered also, and its involvement actively sought. I'm just going to leave that because I've said everything that I can say about it, and there's not more helpful that I can say. But I'm just going to put it in this respect, this being a way to think about it. Let us not continue habitually just because of prior momentum. And I can't think of an area where it would be more difficult than in raising your children, to actually be able to stand back and consider objectively what is the best and highest here. When we first started our school, for the first 7 years, I was the admissions director, even though I'm not a school teacher. And as the school began to develop, and in the beginning it was kind of a generic entrepreneur enterprise, and I knew how to be an entrepreneur, so I could really help getting it going. But as it really developed, and the specialized nature of educating children, became more and more the defining force, I had to withdraw, willingly and happily, and turn it over to a real professional. But one of the things that I learned during those 7 years is just parents and their children. And it was a very unusual parent who could talk to me about their children and know that they were talking about their children and we were not talking about them. On one hand, the parent, of course, has to unite its interests with the child, but to be able to talk adult to adult about the child and know that we were just talking about the child. We weren't judging the parent, we weren't putting the parent down, we weren't making the parent important, we weren't saying the parent was a failure, nothing. We were just talking about the child, because it's not a possession. It's a responsibility that we have to work out together. So I will continue this discussion tomorrow. God bless you.